This week on Nomad Era, I have the pleasure of interviewing someone that I've actually known for quite a while. We went to undergrad together in the States, in Ohio. His name is Anders Møller. He's actually been, one of the most traveled people I've ever met in my life. He's lived on almost every continent. You should make your way to Latin America soon. I think that South America is the only one that he hasn't lived in. And so it's a pleasure to have him here. He's currently living in Singapore, working on his PhD, but he actually spent the last 4 years in Myanmar. So it'll be a pleasure to talk with him about that.
Thank you so much for having me on board, Matteo. I'm looking forward to it. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, very good to see you, Anders. Anders, so you were in Myanmar for 4 years, as I said, working primarily, between the capital and Yangon. But before we get to that, tell me a little bit about just your background, introduce yourself to people, let them know sort of, how you got to that point in the first place.
Okay, sure. I'll just try and blitz through it, skip the details. I was born in Denmark, and when I was 13 years old, I moved to Rwanda, which is in East Africa. And I didn't get the chance to travel or live in other parts of the region or the continent. But when I was 20 years old, I went to college in the US, in Worcester, Ohio. And after finishing undergrad in 2014, I then moved to the UK to do my master's degree in development studies at the University of Oxford. And then I was a little bit kind of wandering around, trying to figure my way out after it was like at a cross point in my life due to a variety of reasons. I did a summer internship in Bangkok and backpacked for a few weeks, made my way back to England. Did some part-time gigs while trying to figure out what's next. And then I was really fortunate to get this thing called an ODI fellowship. ODI, the Overseas Development Institute, is a development think tank in London, an independent think tank. And the fellowship scheme has been running for about 50 years now. And they send fellows that are typically relatively recent or young graduates who have a background in economics to work in developing countries, both LCDs, but also lower middle income countries, where we get stationed in government agencies. So most typically it'll be like a Ministry of Finance or Planning, sometimes in revenue tax authorities, et cetera, et cetera. And I was really fortunate to actually get my preference, which was Myanmar. After I had visited Myanmar for the first time as a casual tourist in late 2016, I really wanted to come back and work in the country and spend some time there. So then I moved to Myanmar in July 2016, and wait, was it 16? Sorry, July 2017. And just less than a month ago, I moved to Singapore. By the way, to add something, I've also gotten fortunate enough to spend a couple of summers working, doing internships in India. And in 2015, I spent a summer, 3 months in the country of Bhutan for my master's thesis research. So those are, not quite as extensive and firsthand as the time I've spent in Myanmar, but also kind of helped me build up like quite a lot of knowledge and experiences there, which have been fantastic. I mean, I think I'm very, very fortunate. A lot of it actually has to do with our undergrad college, because it was through internship opportunities there that I got to go to India, both in 2012 and 2013.
Yeah, no, that's obviously a fascinating story, because, obviously all that travel, especially for, the purposes that you did it, I think that you really got to sort of dive into each country that you went into and sort of immerse yourself in a way that a lot of people don't often have the experience or the opportunity to experience. Tell us a little bit more about what you were doing in Myanmar specifically. What kept you there for 4 years versus all of the other times, in your adult life where you had been there for just a couple of months.
Myanmar, what kept me there? Well, so first I did the fellowship for 2 years, and I spent the first half of it in Yangon, the commercial capital, and then the second half of it in Naypyidaw, which is the political capital. And that's just because of a lot of like bureaucratic complications and delays and stuff like that. So I finished in late 2019, and I moved back to Yangon to focus on a business that I had meanwhile started with a friend of mine. And although we were originally focused on alternative tourism, we and along the way I actually co-founded a board game cafe in Yangon, which is still there. We have some of the best coffee in the city if you're ever around. Well, if you
Absolutely.
like coffee, food, meeting people, hanging out, playing board games, you should check out Dice Society. Okay, you can look us up on Facebook or Google Maps. So it's still there. So Yangon still has a partial lockdown. Public places are not allowed to fully open up, so it's semi-active right now. I've left it in the very capable hands of my co-founders and also some of our staff members that we spent a lot of time, working with and training up so that they could take care of more responsibilities by the time I left. So meanwhile, both because of various stumbling blocks we were running into, but also the COVID pandemic, we pivoted. Our main company pivoted away from alternative tourism and hospitality and towards management consulting. So we rebranded as instead of Mobius Hospitality, we rebranded as Mobius Consulting. And we offer various services, management-related consulting services, primarily to SMEs. That's our focus. We wanted to have an impact. That was always our goal, me and my co-founder. And there are other fancy international consulting firms that already operate in Yangon, but they obviously appeal to a very particular market, usually multinational corporations. And that means that international best practices and managerial knowledge and strategies are often not available to smaller businesses. Usually not at all, because it's too cost prohibitive. So we wanted to use the experience that we had gained both from our successes and our failures, trying to start some business projects in the preceding year or two, to help other companies. And so myself, I have a research intensive background, and I've worked as an economics research and public policy researcher for already more than 2 years in Myanmar at the time. Actually by that point, 3 years. And my business partner and co-founder, he has a project management background, mostly in the IT sector, but also in other fields. So we bring a lot to the table, we felt, potentially to local businesses.
A lot of people who read Nomad Era, who, visit the site, they love to do some travel. Maybe they're not going for the purpose of research or for higher education of any kind. But in your opinion, as you know, especially in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of people who come here, maybe just, on a vacation or for higher education or for some reason that doesn't seem like it would be permanent or long term. And they end up staying here and sort of trying to invest in whatever local economy that they find themselves in. Why do you think that now in particular is such a unique time for people ages 35 and under, or really anybody, but specifically young people, to really sort of step outside of perhaps the country that they were born in, or even the entire, hemisphere that they're born in, and sort of look for different opportunities overseas?
Ooh, that's like a big picture postmodern theory question.
It is.
I think, at least when it comes to Southeast Asia, I think one of the big factors is that the region is considered very dynamic and innovative, and you have a whole host of countries that are emerging right now. There's so-called emerging economies. So you had the initial wave of front runners like Korea, where you are right now, Singapore, Taiwan, if we go a little bit further east, in Hong Kong, and then Thailand and Malaysia and also Brunei have then been recently industrializing quite successfully. And now you've got the smaller or at least poorer economies like Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, that at different stages in the past 2-3 decades have started liberalizing their economies and working towards becoming more dynamic. And I think that's what's attracting a lot of people. These are countries that are fairly well integrated with the global economy, that have pretty decent infrastructure. And of course, one leading cause of globalization and nomadic culture in general is internet connectivity. I mean, this is one of the most well-connected regions in the world, in spite of there being quite a lot of developing countries. Myanmar has one of the cheapest or the lowest prices for 4G mobile internet in the world, and it's also one of the best, most well-connected and fastest speeds. A lot of people in Yangon don't actually have broadband. Instead, they just use their phones, and then they rely on that for streaming movies because it's fast, it's cheap, it's reliable. Mobile internet in Myanmar is more reliable than broadband, and you can stream a movie without interruptions. You can download a whole film, 1 or 2 GB in just a matter of a few minutes, which is extraordinary, and that enables a lot of opportunities. and particularly in the local economy. There's a lot of digital leapfrogging taking place right now. Personally, and this is also something that some of my friends tell me, what I really like about this region is that it's incredibly diverse. There's so much cultural and ethnic diversity in many of the countries here, particularly Myanmar and Indonesia. So Myanmar has a population of about 55 million people, but at least 100 different ethnic groups and as many languages. And each culture is quite, or linguistic or ethno-linguistic culture or group is unique in certain ways and has different food, different languages, different dialects. And they look different. I mean, even when I first came in 2016, I didn't know anything about it, at least not from a theoretical perspective, but I could immediately see and sense the diversity here, which I find fascinating and amazing. Mm. And Indonesia is, if anything, twice as diverse. They have about 300 different languages. Even Vietnam, which I know a lot of people have gone to as tourists, a lot of people don't realize that that's also a fairly diverse place. So the majority makes up, if I remember correctly, about 90% of the population, but you still have like a single-digit percentage which comes from various ethnic minorities, especially up in the northern parts of the country. So it's a very, very diverse place. It's a very exciting part of the world to be in.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And when it comes to global citizenship, when we talk about dynamic and changing places in the world, and how so many more people are traveling across borders, I think that, well, in 2019, probably not in 2020, there were about 1 billion flights that, or 1 billion people that, touched down in a foreign country. 1 billion people on different flights that were international. And some of that is obviously for work, some of that is for leisure, some of that is, students going to study abroad, and a number of other reasons that I probably can't think of off the top of my head. And we went to the same school, we went to a liberal arts school. They talked a lot about global citizenship. We've talked about it, just amongst ourselves recently. Do you consider yourself to be a global citizen now, having lived in so many places, going to school in Singapore? You just went to a Southeast Asian hawker stand last night for dinner and you had South Asian food, but of course you're from Europe, but half of your childhood was spent in East Africa and you're educated in North America in undergrad. And you were educated in the UK, which is an entirely different country in Europe, for postgrad. Are you a global citizen?
When you put it that way, I'm almost forced to say yes, but I want to, yes and no. I primarily would actually say no. Just at a personal level, I don't like that label. I think it's to be blunt, I think it's a very pretentious thing to walk around and say about yourself. I find it, like a bit of a turn off. When I do think about it or talk to people about it, I prefer to think about it in terms of cosmopolitanism, which is a strand of philosophy that has been developed in the late 20th and early 21st century, primarily by Kwame Appiah, who's if I remember correctly, half Ghanaian, half British philosopher and scholar of African studies at the University of Harvard right now. So he actually came to Worcester one time some years ago when I think I was in my probably second, maybe third year. And one of the things he points out, which I do find quite interesting, or an interesting angle, is that it's not actually about your experiences, it's more about your general attitude. So he gave an example during this visiting lecture that imagine a rich woman, wealthy lady in somewhere in Nigeria, in a large city, compared to a young guy who comes from a poor background who lives in a slum area. And the woman can afford to go and travel to Paris for shopping trips, accompanying, for her own business trips, or maybe with her husband, maybe the husband is a diplomat, whatever, and goes out and likes to buy all these fancy brands and show off and get the selfies in front of all the, the highlights, the Instagrammable stuff, but never tries to spend time getting to understand and learn more about the local culture and local people. In contrast, he said, to a poor guy who might own virtually nothing, certainly not a laptop with an internet connection, but has a postcard of a foreign beach hanging on his wall and dreams of traveling and experiencing other cultures, like in-depth, long-term traveling and backpacking. And so Dr. Appiah was arguing that that young guy, in spite of his lack of opportunities, has a more cosmopolitan mindset, or you could just call it a global or open-minded attitude, than the rich woman who doesn't take advantage of the opportunities afforded to her.
Well, I mean, we don't have that much time, but I will leave you with one final question. Out of everywhere that you've lived, where is one place that you think that someone who is starting off as a digital nomad but hasn't decided where they're going to go should look into, because it's underrated and they may not have given it enough thought?
Oof, I mean, I'm biased, that's the problem. I've really enjoyed living and working in Myanmar and the opportunities afforded me there. Unfortunately, I haven't yet had the opportunity to visit Cambodia and Laos, which in some respects are somewhat similar, at least in their overall development trajectory. So I can't really speak to them. What I do know is that Myanmar has a small but surprisingly vibrant startup sector in Yangon. I mean, there's probably only a few hundred startups, depending on how you want to define them, and in fact, there's no concrete data on it right now. But there is a nascent and emerging startup ecosystem in Yangon that has been documented by different reports and research projects out there. And I've also done a little bit of work on it myself back in 2019. And it affords you a lot of support and a lot of opportunities. And one of the most exciting things about trying to start a business in a place like Yangon or Myanmar in general, I mean, it's actually ideal if you can do businesses outside of Yangon and try to benefit more people outside of the urban elite. But one of the big advantages is in most industries, in most sectors, it's a blank slate. So you inevitably have first mover advantage. You have a lot of opportunities as long as you have the courage and the motivation and the right ideas to go out there and grab them. I mean, in some ways, Myanmar can be considered a little bit of a Wild West. And I know that, and it depends, of course, on what you want to do, what business you want to start, what you want to what you want to put up shop with. Maybe Vietnam is a better opportunity for some people. I know Vietnam probably is in this. They have been industrializing for longer. There are more established businesses there, and by extension, a larger market. But they have also a small and active and growing startup ecosystem in its two main cities, Saigon and Hanoi. So yeah, I mean, if I had to do it again, I'd still go back to Myanmar.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, you heard it here first, folks. You got to go to Myanmar, you got to go to Yangon, and you got to play some board games at what I'm sure are reasonable prices, and I'm sure that you guys have a good time, at least when everything's open. Actually, what is the situation right before we cut off? What is the situation as far as COVID restrictions?
It's fluid. It's hard to say. Like right now, you still cannot enter Myanmar except on so-called relief flights, which is essentially just for like UN and INGO workers, diplomats, or people who already have or people who can make a really strong business case. As far as international travel goes and tourism and everything, Myanmar has basically been emulating Thailand, which means that they're still hedging. They have not yet allowed regular travel for any countries yet. There was talks of opening and easing up in January, maybe like with some kind of quota on the number of tourists arriving, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that I haven't kept close track, but I think that these plans are probably put on ice right now because of the emerging new COVID strands in different countries. But if I had to take a wild guess, I would imagine that some form of traveling will even on a tourist visa, for example, would be possible from sometime mid this year onwards.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Anders. It's been a pleasure, and best of luck with your PhD, and thanks for spending time with us.